Annual gay pride parades took on new meaning on Sunday as people poured into the city streets to celebrate the Supreme Court's ruling legalizing same-sex marriage nationwide. Over the weekend, comments on that decision from Republican presidential candidates ranged from calls to respect the decision to support for an amendment that would reverse the ruling. Texas Senator Ted Cruz called it illegitimate and lawless. He would like a constitutional amendment that would abolish the lifetime appointment of Supreme Court justices and allow voters to have a chance to remove them from the bench. Cruz has got a new book out. It's called A Time for Truth, Reigniting the Promise of America. And he joins us now. Senator Cruz, good morning. Good to see you.
Good morning, Savannah. Great to be with you.
Can't think of a better time to have you as a guest with these really consequential rulings coming down last week. You were quoted as saying these two decisions represented some of the darkest 24 hours in American history. And I have to say, that took me back. I can think of some pretty dark days in American history, 9/11, Civil War, Dred Scott. Is it right up there with you for that?
Yeah. Oh, look, what happened last week is twice, back to back, the U.S. Supreme Court, a majority of the justices, violated their judicial oath. On Thursday of last week, the court rewrote Obamacare, rewrote the statute, ignored the language of the statute, and as a result, forced millions of people into this failed law. Millions of Americans are hurting, have lost their jobs, have lost their health care because of Obamacare. And then the next day, the Supreme Court rewrote the Constitution and threw out the marriage laws of all 50 states. Now, listen, I've spent my life fighting to defend the Constitution, and there is a constitutional means. If someone wants to change the marriage laws in a state, the way the Constitution allows you to do so is to convince your fellow citizens, to do so through the democratic process. What we saw instead is 5 unelected lawyers saying the views of 320 million Americans don't matter because they're going to enforce their own policy positions.
Let me ask you about that, because one thing you also said was that you would support a Texas state clerk who refused to issue a license to a gay couple on religious grounds. Let me ask you this. If a state clerk refused to issue a marriage license to an interracial couple, would you agree with that, too?
Well, there's no religious backing for that. And one of the things...
But you know that in the Loving Virginia versus Virginia case, which is struck down the bans on interracial marriage, they used religious arguments to justify that.
There's no religious backing for that. And I have spent decades fighting against bigotry and racial oppression. I'm the son of a Cuban immigrant. Bigotry is fundamentally wrong. And one of the things I talk about in the book, A Time for Truth, is fighting to defend religious liberty. For me, religious liberty isn't some newfound campaign theme. I've spent 2 decades, when I was the Solicitor General of Texas, the chief lawyer for the state in front of the United States Supreme Court. Over and over again, we fought and defended religious liberty and won. We defended the 10 Commandments and won. We defended the Pledge of Allegiance and won. You know, one of the things I was really honored to do, I represented over 3 million veterans defending the Mojave Desert Veterans Memorial and won. And religious liberty is right at the foundation of our country.
Well, let me go back to this case that Loving versus Virginia. This is a precedent you're well aware of. This struck down a state ban on interracial marriage. This is something that many, many people see parallels with the same case that just decided gay marriage. You say it should be left to states. Would you have taken that same position on the case of interracial marriage, that that's not a constitutional right and the states should have been free to ban interracial marriage if they wanted to?
Of course not. And we fought a bloody civil war.
What's the difference in those two cases?
It is exactly what I said, that we fought a bloody civil war over the original sin of our country that was slavery. Slavery was grotesque and immoral, and some 600,000 Americans lost their lives, spilled their blood on American soil to expunge it, and we passed 3 amendments, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution to ensure that everyone has equal rights regardless of race. And that was honoring the promise of the Constitution. It was the right thing to do. You know, one of the things that in my book, A Time for Truth, I talk about is my time clerking at the U.S. Supreme Court, trying to give people a window to what happens behind the scenes. It's the same thing I try to do in the Senate, where we're giving people an understanding not just of what is said on the news, but what's actually happening behind closed doors, the role of money and, sadly, the corruption of both Republicans and Democrats who joined together in what I call the Washington cartel.
You talk about corruption, money in politics, and yet you're suggesting this constitutional amendment that would subject Supreme Court justices to retention elections, which sounds like injecting politics into the one branch of government the framers were very clear about they did not want to have to be subject to the political winds. How do you explain that?
Well, let's be clear. The court has injected itself into politics. You've got, Justice Scalia wrote 2 powerful dissents. I would encourage everyone to read Justice Scalia's dissents, where he says these decisions are a fundamental threat to democracy, and he says 5 unelected lawyers have declared themselves the rulers
Would
of
elections make it
320
less
million
political?
Americans. What's interesting, I wrote a long op-ed in National Review laying out that 20 states have adopted retention elections. Now, they're rarely used, but they're a check when judges abuse their authority and violate the Constitution. And if you're, one of the things Justice Scalia talks about, you've got 9 lawyers. They're all from Harvard or Yale. There are no Protestants on the court. There are no evangelicals on the court. The elites on the court look over much of this country as flyover country. They think that our views are simply parochial and don't deserve to be respected. And Justice Scalia pointed out, what a crazy system to have the most important issues of our day decided by unelected lawyers. We have 50 states. If states could decide this, some states, maybe New York and California, would go one way, and maybe Texas and Florida would go the other. That's the miracle of our Constitution.
Well, Senator Ted Cruz, I know you know the Constitution well. Thank you so much for your time. We got to run, but I appreciate having you here.
Hello, Today fans. Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking that button down there and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives.